Next up, it is Atty Vohra,
Hello.
a coworker of mine. We know each other.
From
yeah,
work. Yeah.
yeah, from work. Yeah, friend from work. But also a talented game designer. Works in systems-driven kind of development and addicted to D&D and a self-described forever DM. So I'll let you get on with teaching us how to apply systems to reduce your dungeon master prep.
Thanks. Preface: I'm gonna be nerding out about Dungeons and Dragons and say a lot of lingo. So if you haven't played much Dungeons and Dragons, I'm gonna link just a link in the chat. Oh wait, Alexa, could we link that in the chat actually?
Yes, I'll do that for
Thank you.
you.
Yeah, just in case you don't know any lingo, you can Control F on the website and find any terminology. Okay, so story time. A 2-year long campaign I was DMing for friends was coming to an end. I had a terribly tough week at work, and I had totally forgotten about an upcoming session for that campaign. I had 30 minutes of prep time before it was go time, and I was super stressed. I didn't want my players to have a bad session. I didn't want to cancel last minute. Coincidentally, I had this half-baked, untested combat generator that hadn't seen the light of day in a while. I took the gamble, generated the combat for that session in an instant, polished it for about 5-10 minutes, and now here I am to share with you how that generator changed the way I DM'd. So, hi, I'm Atty, he, him, associate game designer at Improbable. I'm still figuring out my ProcGen class, but let's go with Bard Druid for now. And I've been jamming for 3 years. And this is a talk about what it looks like when my ProcGen obsession starts leaking into my TTRPG life. So real quick, let's just generate. I'll show you how the generator works. So here we got a command prompt. I have a Python script over here. I'm going to choose a difficulty. Let's say it's going to be a hard encounter for a level 7 party. And boom, we got a wall of text. It has like hit points, armor class, DCs, stats, actions, special actions, desperation actions. What are those? I'll explain it in a little bit. For now, this is just the simplicity of how this generator works. But we'll be using a different stat block for this talk. It's a difficult encounter for a level 6 party. I generated this 30 minutes ago just to prove my point. And yeah, it's very similar, has stats and stuff like that, and it's pretty decent. So at first look, the stat block, just the wall of text, might look really weird. A lot of it doesn't look like a proper, fully fledged stat block from the monster manual. So here's a monster manual stat block for reference. This is an adult blue dragon. As you can see, the game designers have put a lot of thought into what it does. The lightning breath has like a whole spiel about it and how it's described and what players have to do in response to it. It's very detailed. On the other hand, here's my generated wall of text, which is quite abstract. There's like a layer of abstractness in the way the monster's various actions are described if you look into the list of creatures' actions. But that abstract wall of text was what I was going for because I wanted to make a lightweight, flexible, custom tool to complement my own improv-heavy DM style. So let's talk about the design of the generator a little bit because that might offer insight as to why I made it the way I made it. So 5e, 5th edition D&D, already gives me a set of rules for what a player can do, what a monster can do on their turns in combat. So it was easy for me to model the output of the generator based on the stat blocks and the monster manual and actions in the books. However, I realized that what I really needed to define was the kind of output that I wanted to see at the end. What kinds of output lead to interesting combat encounters for my players? And that was an interesting design question for me to solve. So Matt Colville made a video about action-oriented combat. It highlights a design philosophy about how we can make combat in 5e engaging by telling an evolving story throughout the combat. He says, to pick a monster, think about the themes of that monster, what it would do under certain conditions, and then design the mechanics around the situations. Like, what does a goblin boss do when it's cornered? Yell at his subordinates to attack all at once, throw themselves at the problem. The monster should feel like it's reacting and has tactics for the party to experience. I ended up borrowing from Colville's design philosophy because I've been using it for years and it works great for me. But for this generator, I decided to invert it. I would generate the numbers and mechanics first, and then I would use those as constraints to create a monster instead. That way, I don't have to think about the numbers at all. I just got to justify why things are the way they are, which to me is a lot easier and faster. So the generator deals with the numbers, the stuff that I find tedious to work with and doing preparation, and it lets me focus on storytelling by offering a level of abstraction in the descriptions of the monster's mechanics. So, like, for example, in the special action number 1, the creature may drain resource or on an ability cooldown of 3 rounds. It's an adjective verb pair. Special action, what is that? Drain could mean anything. Resources, like hit points, spell slots. It could mean anything in a limited mechanical subspace. But the purpose is to inspire my creativity by offering constraints for me to work within. For example, when I see the stats on this thing, I notice the whole like drain gain pattern in the special actions, and accompanied with the ability to cast necromancy spells, it kind of exudes like an undead creature vibe to me, or some kind of necromancer. It has a move speed of 45, so maybe it can fly around like a ghost. I see the charisma is the highest stat. Maybe it's a leader, maybe it's a warlock. It has resistance and vulnerability to piercing damage. How does that even work? So for this stat block, for example, this is what it looked like after a few minutes of polish and throwing it into a stat block creator right before this talk. This is the hallowed soul of Princess Anjani. She was subjected to terrible torment in the castle of the city above, by the hands of the patriarchal sultanate. It's said that her restlessness and vengeful spirit haunts the sewers to this day, and that her ghoulish visage is flushed with wounds of the past as she teeters on the verge of undeath. That drain ability from earlier, it became a legendary action. If you look at special action Dreams of Torment, that's the evolution of that constraint. It basically makes the player characters roll a d20 for a save, and it has possibility to drain the spell slots, which in turn fuels her own kind of flickering between the ethereal and the prime material plane, and justifies the vulnerability and resistance to piercing damage. So when she's ethereal, she's resistant. If players stumble across her, on the way, if they're questing around, then there's a good chance they might get a bit curious about this sultanate and the sketchiness behind it, and end up taking up the quest to avenge Anjani and tear down the sultanate's patriarchy. As a DM, I can pepper in these generated combats and weave the outcome of the story of the combat into the overarching narrative later. And this has led to more dynamic arcs in narrative for my table stories. So with that, I want to share some thoughts and questions that I've reflected on as I started making more generators to help me save prep time for my sessions. Number 1, what parts of GMing do you want to put more focus on than others? This may reveal what parts of DMing feel tedious to you and what things you might want to automate so that you can spend more time on different facets of DMing that you want to work on. You might not want to have the best kind of combat in the world, but you want to really make roleplay experience for your table feel really good. So automate the combat, focus on roleplaying. Session prep can get lonely. At the table, we're improving with our friends as NPCs, but while we're prepping behind the DM screen, there's often no one there to yes and with you. A generator could be that improv partner to help make session prep more creative and fun. So example, generator could tell me that this giant monster at 40% health, its desperation mechanic, will spawn tons of minions around the field. Yes, and the minions are specters of all the loved ones of the player characters. Now this is getting serious. And now there's a story. So I used to be the sort of DM who needed to know things before a session. At least I would spend like an hour to prepare before a session. I know a lot of DMs who have a lot of fun spending many hours in prep too. I do too. But for me, time after work is like my most precious resource. So instead of preparing for an hour right after work for a session, I can have tea time with my cat. I've learned to embrace the dark side of random generation and lean into it. It's made my TTRPG sessions more spontaneous and fun for me. And nothing feels better than rolling up at the table and telling your players that even you don't know what a combat would look like until you press the button on the computer and watch the fear in their eyes and revel in it. This is kind of what it looks like when I walk in with a weird creature for a session, and it's really fun. It's always very fun. It's a party of kobolds, each a different color, resembling a Power Ranger. So what else can we automate in our TTRPGs? All of this to ask, can we automate NPC dialogue, faction wars, the big bad evil guy's plot to victory, the entire complex thematic dungeon that you've been kind of developing for your players for months, skill challenges? Can we simulate the entire world of your D&D campaign between sessions so that it feels like it's being lived in and stuff is evolving around the players? This can go anywhere, and the constraints can are possibly endless. I wouldn't recommend simulating your entire world, but if that's a challenge you want to take on, then go for it. But yeah, basically, I encourage you all to try and making a generator for your TTRPG games if you haven't already, whatever that might look like. It's quite fun in my experience, and I'm looking forward to iterating more on this generator of mine, this comma generator. Maybe I can make it have varying levels of detail depending on my mood. Anyway, if you ever make a generator for your TTRPG experience, then share with me what it looks like. I'm excited to take a look at it. I'm running an hour-long combat one-shot using this generator in the following social hour. So come hang out and play for like 45 minutes of lighthearted D&D with generated characters. And yeah, thank you for your time. I'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Atty. And yeah, like you just mentioned, people can look forward to you're going to be bold enough to do a live play demo. So very exciting. That was great. I think that we have one question in the note wall already from Alexa, which is, do you ever get outputs which you can't come up with anything for?
Personally, like my style is oriented towards like having the constraints allows me to just like pick things that I think will work well from it. So for example, if we go back all the way to the stat block earlier, sometimes I can't think about a good way to make this piercing and vulnerability to piercing work out. Sometimes it's just like a stump in a wall. So I'll just get rid of it, ignore it, and focus on other parts of the generation instead. And maybe use those as inspiration to develop a cool mechanic.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a team member. You can yes and you can also say no.
Exactly.
That's great. Are there any other questions from people? Use the note walls. People definitely were talking about other things they'd like to generate. I think it was Brian Buckley was wanting like a kingdom generator with kind of relationships and stuff like that you could improv off of.
Yeah, you could totally maybe make use of Matt Koval's Kingdoms and Warfare PDF and just like use those as the rules to generate entire kingdoms that players can mess around with and use as a stronghold. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah,